of wire jewelry and scarves is new to Central Oregon Writers Guild this year. As of July of 21, she suddenly lost her identical twin sister. For Joan's first solo birthday, she wanted to honor Jill, but wasn't sure how. One morning, she woke at 2:30 with a line too good to let go. She wrote it down on the spot. Barely did she get back in bed when more lines came. 2 days later, with little sleep, this first poem was finished. She's not sure if Jill, who used to write poetry and or God, was helping, but words flowed through her onto the page. A year's writing journey produced over 115 divinely inspired poems, which carried Joan through her sorrow. Ideally, she wants to publish them to help others move artistically through their own grief. Please welcome Joan Gordon reading a birthday tribute to her identical twin sister, Jill.
Hopefully you can hear me. A few months ago, I had no voice, so I'm doing better. This is called Jill's Ocean of Hope. The tides of grief flow in and out. Influenced by the moon, currents confront and challenge. A turbulent ocean of anguish, the pulling of an undertow, imbalance, heartache, a maelstrom of intensity. Swirling waves of emotions, a sea of anxieties, pensive, sensitive, concern. Recalling past joint excursions, walking with time, side by side, leaving footprints in the sand. Solitude, swelling, waning sensations, stormy, overwhelming, and frantic. A turbulent upsurge, undulating feelings like pebbles tossed about on the beach. Grief is like an ocean, constantly churning with its tugging undercurrent, the stirring of aching turmoil, a steady tidal heartbeat felt deep in my soul. Each wave a new salt-watery tear. The natural constant sound of the roaring sea gushing, cascading, and surging towards the shore. Gulls crying out in pain or sorrow. The smell of refreshing salt water. Reviving winds and air of hope. Sand dollars and shells, treasures to dwell upon. Even in the darkness of night, a silver moon's reflection is afloat. Shadows of sorrow illuminate the way until the rising of morning. MOURNING. Is the light casting a glow of hope? Breathtaking surroundings, a vista to behold with awe. Whether savoring the view through large glass windows from the couch or strolling on the beach, we stare out into the depths, enjoying the vastness of water as far as the eye can see, observing the ever-changing motion, a dance of movement, rhythmic, magical, mesmerizing, heartfelt reflections, a cherished beachside getaway, her favorite place. Happy emotions, smiling, recalling childhood, taking photos and watching the sunrise shine upon the water and the colors of sunset as they meld into the sea. Wondrous shared family times, breaking waves of loving memories crashing in, flooding the mind, each with our own thoughts. Words unsaid, discussions of future plans, now left undone. Sadness swirling in, growing like strong waves about to break. Sorrow, loss, open wounds of the heart. Water running deep with aqua, turquoise, and blue. High and low dunes to wade through, miniature sand grains adhering together, creating a pliable surface. Forever molding into a solid path on which to dream. The sensation of wet sand between the toes, drifts, changing and adapting, a guiding, healing force, searching a new direction. A tranquil and pacifying tide rolls in, moistening and smoothing the shore. Visible are footprints of shock, disbelief, guilt, and sadness of a lost loved one ever so dear. At water's edge, the beach alters roots and renews the spirit, pointing a gentle way to proceed forward. Sadly, now only one set of prints remain. Thank you.
Very much. So yeah, back to the point of emotion and writing. I mean, that's what gets us, right? Beautiful metaphor using the ocean there. It keeps coming back in, and I felt it, and it just kind of made me want to go to the beach. I hear it's really nice out there right now. Thank you very much for that. So we're gonna have Ariella Moon join us here and talk to us. And Ariella is a fantasy and paranormal fiction writer. She's published nonfiction articles on women's spirituality, and her fiction include the Teen Witch Saga and the Two Realms trilogy. Ariella will lead you through the world building process and draw upon her real life shamanic experiences to answer your questions about magic and paranormal characters, including shamans, witches, demons, ghosts, and things that go bump in the night. She'll talk to us tonight about diabolical devices for creating page-turning fiction. Plot twists, reversals, red herrings, and chapter cliffhangers are just a few devices for keeping your readers up at night, swearing just one more chapter. Discover ways to avoid sagging plots, amp up your writing, and hold your readers' attention. So welcome, Ariella Moon.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. First of all, let me say, as a shaman and someone who just lost a family member, that was very brave of your reader to read that beautiful poetry. And it sounds like it was channeled. And I just want to honor the bravery that it took to go ahead and to read that, because grief is not just an ocean, but it can be a tsunami, and you never know when it's going to hit.
Yep.
So I honor you for your bravery, and my condolences for your loss. I actually, my sister lives in Bend, and I just got a text from her saying, no, I'm not going to crash the meeting and sneak in because that would be awkward. So evidently my sister is not the crazy lady that she was in her teen years. So, but she's here with me in spirit in a kind of a different way. So welcome. Thank you so much to Denise Hughes Lewis for inviting me to be here tonight, and for Mike Cooper being kind and supporting in all this. I noticed that as kind of the read up, the little blurb is kind of a mashup from what I'm doing tonight. It's really going to be focused on diabolical devices for creating page turning fiction. But I had also said that if we have any paranormal people, or should I say paranormal fiction writers in the audience who want to ask questions, you know, if you're having trouble with your world building, or just have any questions about the paranormal, I am super happy to leave some time for that. I know it's really hard to be able to connect with a shaman or a witch or someone who works with, with angels, or has had to deal with dragons or demons, or, any of those paranormal things, because they, these people just don't let themselves be known to most people. So it's a rare opportunity. And if we have anybody in the audience who needs a little, if you're stuck and don't know how would this really happen in real life, I will be happy to explain whatever you want. But in the meantime, we will focus on the literary devices that are going to create the page turning fiction. So hopefully that's agreeable to everybody. So what is a literary device? Well, it's the technique that shapes a story's narrative to produce a particular effect. And literary devices are kind of cool because they can be used as like the backbone of your story, as far as if you're an outliner, a plotter as opposed to a pantser. You can use this if you know ahead of time that you're going to use one of these devices. It can really help you with plotting. I think probably everybody here does the 3-act plotting and or structure, I should say, though we may have it sounds like we might have some screenwriters in the room. And of course they use a slightly different, or a lot of them use a slightly different structure. But these can also be used for that sagging middle, because, Act 1 is a quarter of your structure. Act 2 is half the structure, half the story. And then Act 3 is the last quarter. So a lot of people get kind of in trouble in that middle half. So these devices can really help you. And you'll find that only a few of them are kind of diabolical. Though if you write paranormal, suspense, or thrillers, you could probably make any of these be very diabolical. So I might skip a little bit of the stuff that I had planned for the very end, or I'll ask you towards the very end if you want me to skip the very end so that there's more time for questions. I heard that you all show up with a pen and paper. I can see a few of you already have yours out. So I will, because this is kind of a short class for me, I will give you some homework, and not that much to do like in live time here, but a little bit of that. So I will try not to bore you. So let's start with one of my favorites devices, and that is the plot twist. So that is a surprise development that takes the story in an unexpected direction. And everything I'll be talking about tonight are all things that can either reveal character or in some way push the story forward, which is why they're so useful, particularly in the middle. But some of them work really well at any point in your story, and some are more effective at the climax. Some can actually be in the backstory and revealed through flashback. So plot twists, that's where you take the reader by surprise, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we're making a left-hand turn here, and I didn't see that coming. So it can be really useful. With a plot twist, you use minimal foreshadowing, and you tend to withhold information for as long as you possibly can, so that you can create tension and that you can release the big plot twist at the most impactful moment. And only you can know with your story where that moment is, because it can be anywhere, depending on which of these devices you use. And pretty much everything I'll be talking about tonight falls under a plot twist. So make sure that you lay some groundwork if you're going to do any of these plot twists. It doesn't have to be a ton of groundwork, depending on which kind you use. But if you don't lay any groundwork at all, you're going to, you risk enraging your readers, and we never want to do that. So be sure you do a careful setup, because you need to know the ground rules. You have to lay the ground rules before you twist them. Okay, so I can tell you from my personal experience, and I'm sure a lot of you probably have the same experience, readers really like to feel like they're clever, like they're smart, and they try to outsmart the protagonist. And I grew up on Agatha Christie mysteries, and my whole thing was to see how quickly I can ferret out the murderer. And I got really, really good at it. And to this day, actually. And so you want to be able to bring that reader in and hook her or him by tantalizing them along the way. So be sure that you, if you outsmart them, but you've laid the groundwork, you are going to have a reader for life, because they're going to be totally devoted to you, because they will respect you for outsmarting them as long as you laid the groundwork. And Agatha Christie herself got into super trouble back in the day because she wrote a book that when it came out, reviewers just absolutely said, kick her out of, the Writers Guild and do this and do that, because they felt she had not put the groundwork down. I knew nothing of that controversy when I read the book and as a teenager. And I remember stopping on the page where there was 3 words, and that was the only setup for the plot twist and the murderer reveal. And that was when Agatha Christie wrote 10 minutes later, 3 words. And I remember reading those 3 words and whoops, go back. There's a gap here. She would not be pointing out this gap unless it was important. And I guess a lot of reviewers back at the time missed those 3 words. So again, I felt really smart because I figured it out. And it wasn't until years and years later that I realized that it had been a real problem when she first published the book. So they will be delighted if they outsmart you or if you outsmart them. But you have to play fair. You have to at least have those 3 words or something that is going to give a person a clue. So one writer, a modern day writer, who did this really, really well, and that is A.J. Finn. And he's the one who wrote The Woman in the Window. The Woman in the Window came out in 2018. It was sold at auction for a huge amount. It was his debut novel. I met him at a writer's event soon after it had come out and got an autographed copy. I'm so thrilled. And then I read it and I was even more thrilled because he managed to outsmart me. I could not figure out this plot till the very end. I mean, almost to the very end. So, excuse me, I had so much respect for him as an author that he was able to do that. And he used some of the devices that we are going to talk about tonight. He had a possibly unreliable narrator. He threw in red herrings. He just did all kinds of great things. So if you want to see how plot twists can work really well, you might try A.J. Finn's, Finn, The Woman in the Window. Excuse me. So let's go to how some of these work. Can you see the whole screen? Can you see all the words? Do I need to make?
Yes.
You can see it? Okay, good. Because I have my view on the side there. Okay, so if we go all the way back to like Aristotle's time, then we come up with peripeteia. And this means sudden reversal. It's a sudden turn of events, and usually events that go from good to bad. And so it's impactful. It can be used impactfully in the middle or at the climax of your story. And for an example of peripeteia would be in The Sixth Sense, when Bruce Willis's character finally realizes that he's dead. And so that's a huge turn of events for him because he didn't realize he was dead. And so it gets to revealing character. How do you react if you suddenly experience peripeteia? So everybody, each of us, has a core belief about ourselves. And this is usually unshakable. So I want you to take a moment, if you've got your pen and paper in hand, and I want you to write down, what is your core belief about yourself? And then write down, what is your protagonist's core belief about his or herself? And I'll give you a couple minutes. And it can be simple because it'll only be one sentence for you and one sentence for them. Now, the importance of knowing your character's core belief is because you're going to be throwing things at this poor character throughout the manuscript. And some of them are going to challenge that core belief. So think about, for your character, or make it more personal about yourself, how would you feel if you had a sudden reversal? what if you suddenly lost your good name or your job? Or what if something came about that made you question or made other people question your character, which is usually goes to your core belief. So what if that core belief was challenged, excuse me, before your story even begins? An example of that would be a person that I encountered, an old friend. And I didn't know her backstory, her own personal backstory, but I noticed certain things about her. And one was that she held wealthy people in complete contempt. And I noticed that she always insisted on being the one doing the driving. It wasn't until years later of knowing her that I found out that in childhood, she had a fairly upper middle class home and went to a private school. And then her father was tragically injured, had a brain injury, excuse me, through a car accident. So, to her great misfortune and reversal, her paternal grandmother happened to have power of attorney over her son. And she used that power of attorney to divorce her parents. So suddenly the mother and her mother and she and her sister were kind of thrown out in the streets because of this evil grandmother who wanted to steal all of the money. And that explained why she had contempt for people with wealth and why she always insisted on driving, because she had realized that your entire life can get thrown away in a minute because of a car accident or something else. So what would you do if you had that kind of reversal of fortune, but it happened before your story actually begins? It's in the backstory. So in that case, you can reveal slowly over time and through flashbacks this sort of a story of how this person's core belief of who they were or are got ripped out from under them, and how that changed the trajectory of their life or their character's arc. Peripeteia. Now, with eucatastrophe, it's one of those words I have to get like a running start on. That's when things go from bad to very bad, and then all of a sudden, great. So that's kind of a strange one, but if you think of Lord of the Rings and Frodo's character arc and quest, things keep going bad, right? I mean, that ring is just one problem after the other. And just when Frodo thinks all is lost and that the bad guy, the antagonist, is going to get the ring, all of a sudden Gollum shows up and steals the ring and is just so excited and happy about getting this ring that Gollum falls into the fire with the ring, and then the bad guy, Sauron, does not get the ring. So with eucatastrophe, it's when at the very last minute something great happens, but it's not really because of any action taken by the hero or the heroine. It's just, like serendipity or something. Now, Tolkien did go through and show certain decisions that Frodo made throughout the story that kind of gave little hints that led up to this, or that enabled Gollum to get to the point where he was. But they were very subtle, and you certainly wouldn't necessarily see this all of a sudden falling into the fire bit. So that's what eucatastrophe is. So another one that goes back, another Greek word that goes back to Aristotle's time is anagnosis. I have all these hard to pronounce words in here. So this is discovery, and this is a different one from all the other devices we're going to talk about tonight, in that it's the transition from ignorance to knowledge. And it's different because it reveals character in a different way because it's all internal. It's like when Darth Vader tells Luke Skywalker, "I am your father." That shook Luke's core belief in himself and in his situation. And so you often will see in a manuscript that has peripetia, it also has this one. So, and all of these, as you can start to see, start to reveal character. So if you had this shocking discovery about yourself, your birthright, who you thought you were, that is going to force you into action. And so that's another way of sending the character off and the story off into a new direction. And it reveals character because how does your character respond to this huge reversal or this huge shock? So that's it. And that's one that you can show. You can start using flashbacks to kind of like slowly reveal and slowly foreshadow this type of a plot twist. But again, it differs in the others in that it's wholly internal. And again, it goes back to that core belief we all have. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones, the false protagonist. And it's really tricky to pull off. And so it's not done very often. So when it is done, it's like, wow, they used the false protagonist, yay. So think of Game of Thrones, where you think you have a protagonist, you think this person's the hero or the heroine, they're going to be with me, and then they get beheaded in scene 1, that kind of a thing. So that's the false protagonist. That's when, oh, nope, this person's not going to be the protagonist. Somebody else is going to be. And I think if you want to learn how to write the false protagonist, I highly recommend Holly Black and Cassandra Clare's Magisterium series. It is directed at middle grade students, middle grade readers. So because of that, we lucked out in the sense that they're not going to behead or kill off the kid, right? Because that's not cool. So because the false protagonist, the child who has been brought up to believe that they were the savior, that they were the golden child, all that whole kind of archetype, suddenly realizes, whoops, no, I'm not going to be the one to save the day. So then you get this amazing story that can go off in many directions. And that's why it's a series, because you can explore this over several books. So by not killing off the false protagonist, you get to find out, well, how does this child react to this discovery? And then how does the real protagonist react to suddenly being, totally unprepared, suddenly realizing, oh, wait, now I'm the savior, I'm supposed to do this. But then you also have the character arc of the antagonist, who suddenly also has to shift gears because now the real protagonist has been revealed. So you can see where there's so much conflict, so much revealing of character in this kind of a story. So again, it's Holly Black and Cassandra Clare in the Magisterium series for young adults. So sorry, spoiler alert, it's that the person you think is the real, golden child isn't. But it does give you the opportunity, the author, the opportunity to show you how to switch perceptions and how that switch in perception can affect everybody in the book, basically. Here's one I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is the red herring. And this shows up a lot in mysteries, in thrillers, and in suspense stories. And the whole point of the red herring is to distract and misdirect, because we don't want you to figure out who the murderer was or is too early in the plot. So we'll send you over here thinking, oh, it must be that person. Oh, nope, now we've got a red herring going the opposite direction. But don't pay attention to this person who actually is the murderer. So the red herring is one that continues to be a mainstay, particularly in the genres of mystery, suspense, and thriller, because it works really well. And as I'm going through these, I want you to be thinking about your own stories, your own work in progress, and how you might be able to apply some of these to deepening your characters, or deepening your stories, or solving problems that you might have come up against in your stories. So one of my favorite literary devices is the unreliable narrator. And that one can be really diabolical. So the unreliable narrator is someone who seems to be very trustworthy at first, but after a startling revelation, you find out, oh no, this person's not a reliable narrator at all. I can't trust anything they say. Now, another way of doing that, or looking at that, is if from the beginning, the narrator is shown to be unreliable, and that could be because of mental illness or grief or alcohol dependency or drug dependency, anything that would throw them off of their, being a reliable witness, say in a court proceedings, that can create an knowing unreliable narrator. But the twist is when that knowing what you think is the unreliable narrator turns out to be completely reliable, despite their mental illness, their grief, their drug addiction, their alcoholism. My case, a shaman who sees, ghosts everywhere or whatever, they can still be reliable. So that's where the twist can come in. Or the plot twist can come in is the seemingly unreliable narrator is actually the murderer, or is actually a dead person. So there are lots of ways that you can twist the unreliable narrator. So that it depends on whether or not that narrator is actually being truly devious and trying to throw you off, so that the unreliable narrator themselves is kind of a red herring, or if this person is actually just being thrown off temporarily because of trauma or something. So there's a lot of ways you can play with the unreliable narrator. Poetic justice, I'm sure you all know that, because that kind of goes across all genres, though I do kind of always think of the spaghetti westerns with poetic justice. So this is when a character is either rewarded or punished for their actions. And it's become a little bit of a cliche, but it still works if you write it well. And I personally found one of the best examples of poetic justice happened in one of the Harry Potter books, where J.K. Rowling wrote a certain professor and so well that I just hated this professor. I hated her, I hated her, I hated her, and I wanted her dead. And I normally don't get that invested in a character or care that much what happens to them, but I really wanted to end her. And that was an interesting decision that J.K. Rowling made with that particular character, because in a series, each book has its own arc, but then they always have to fit into the overarching arc of the series. And we all know by now that she really plotted out in exacting detail the entire series and every book in the series. And so she made a choice that within that one book where we first meet this character, and the character is the main antagonist in that book, that she didn't give the reader the satisfaction of poetic justice at the end. We had to keep reading more and more books, waiting for this woman, this professor, to finally, get her comeuppance. And so that was another way of creating tension and creating super fans and creating people who would keep going back to the story because they so wanted to see, a bright, amazing ending for this woman. And remember that your story, your antagonist, I should say your protagonist, is only as powerful as your antagonist. If you have like the superhero, but the antagonist is, someone with nothing, no powers, then it's not even, and there's no tension, there's no, really no story. So you have to have that over the top. You have to have it be equal in power. I hope this makes sense. If not, when we get to the end and you ask questions, you can let me know. And also please let me know if I'm talking too quickly, because I do have a tendency to do that when I'm trying to get a lot of information in.
You're doing great.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we're coming up on some homework here. Flashbacks. So I have to say, when I first started writing, I didn't really, I mean, instinctively you hopefully you're doing this, but I didn't really plot out and think flashbacks should always reveal something new. They should reveal something new about the character. They should reveal something new about the story. And in doing so, they can be used as laying the groundwork for a plot twist, or they can be used to propel the story forward, or to put up a barrier for your main character, or to explain something about your character, like my friend whose father had the tragic brain injury. So there's a lot you can do with a plot twist and with flashbacks. So I think I use it mainly personally for planting the backstory. That's where you can start dribbling in that backstory without doing an author's dump. Like you can lay the groundwork, you can get in some of that backstory in a believable way that doesn't overwhelm the reader. It's a way to reveal things like, oh, did the heroine have a secret baby when she was a teenager? Or is the mystery woman actually the real killer? Or is the protagonist actually a dead person? Things like that. You can start revealing, leading up to your twist by laying some of this groundwork with a flashback. So I want you, for your homework, to go back to your work in progress and look at any flashbacks that you've written and ask yourself, what do they reveal? In this flashback, does it somehow move my story forward with new information, or in some way push things forward, give new information that, like a new reveal? Or does it somehow show character? And does it somehow maybe explain why your character is the way they are now by doing the flashback? So that's your homework. What do you look at each flashback, and what does it reveal? And as my editor would say, if it does not reveal anything, if it's not adding to the value of your story, then consider deleting it. And we all hate to give those up, right? If you write enough books, you start having your editor's voice in your head. You no longer have your own personal judgment. You start having her voice or his voice in your head saying, I don't think you should do that. Okay, reverse chronology. I'm not going to leave this one up too long because the picture makes me ill. These are books that begin at the end. And this is most often told as a series of flashbacks. And it's where the exposition is completely bypassed. And, it's where it's told in series. I'm looking at the wrong paragraph. So a reverse chronology, the book that begins at the end, and it's most often told as a series of flashbacks that work their way up to where the book started. Now, a classic one of this would be The Night Watch by Sarah Waters, if you want to see how that's done. Or just watch any 1 hour drama on television. So many of them will start at the end, where it's like all of a sudden we're at the murder scene, but we don't know how it happened or who these people are. And then we start working our way back to that. Or it'll show something happening and then usually it's bloody. And then the next scene will be 18 months earlier, or 2 weeks earlier, or earlier that day, depending on how long the ticking clock is. And they work their way back to that. So The Night Watch by Sarah Waters, or any 1 hour drama. In media res, that's Latin for into the middle of things. And this is like, I've really had to work at not doing this one so over the top. I'm showing Indiana Jones here because that's who's usually in my head when I first writing a book. Is like, okay, how can I just like start this gangbusters and really with a lot of action. So that's really what it means. It means to that's when you bypass exposition, you don't have any explanations, you're just like in the action. All of a sudden, this man is running from this gigantic rolling stone thing that's coming at him because he's just stolen, an artifact. Who is this guy and what's going on here? And then you slowly start getting the backstory. It's filled in gradually, either through dialogue or flashbacks or description of past events. And then you get kind of caught up in the story. So again, this is something that happens a lot on television and movies. And it can be a really dynamic way to start your book and to catch the reader's attention. So speaking of readers' attention, oh my gosh, nonlinear narratives. Those are ones that readers either hate or love. And because they can seem very disjointed, and it's not going to be, if you're a very linear person, you're going to hate these because they jump all around. A classic television example of this would be, it's off the air now, but if you ever watch This Is Us, where you never knew when you tuned in, are the three siblings going to show up as babies, or are they not born yet, or are they adults? Are they grandparents? What are they? And then you kind of go around with all these different nonlinear points of view, and you just try to figure it out. And so people who really need logic and straight ahead, if this doesn't work for them. But for other people who are more able to, maybe more nimble in their thinking, are able, to embrace it. So just know when you show things out of chronological order, there is a certain risk to it. But This Is Us was, like a top rated television show, so it can work. And it definitely creates tension. And it's an interesting way to show different points of view and to reveal character. So it has a lot of pluses. You may have heard of Chekhov's gun. And this is an item or a small detail that's introduced early in the story that plays a crucial role later in the story. Now, some people believe that everything in your book has to have some function. And excuse me, and other people believe that some things are just background or world building. And I guess the difference is if you put a particular emphasis on a particular object or person or scene, then it becomes like the Chekhov's gun. And Anton Chekhov was a physician and short story author who lived in the 1880s. And he famously said that if you have, in the opening scene, if you have a gun hanging on the wall in Act 1, then by Act 3, it better be, somebody should shoot it. It needs to be discharged. So then it must fire in the last act, is how we put it. So again, Chekhov's gun does not refer to necessarily to an actual physical item, but it could refer to a scene or a character. And it all depends on how much emphasis you put on that. So don't take it literally. Now, as a shaman, I'll put on that hat for a moment and just say that, as we're writing, sometimes we're channeling, and we write things that we don't really know at that moment why we put in that detail. But put it in, even if you don't know, you can always edit it out later. But if you find yourself blocked, go back and look for something that may have been a Chekhov's gun, but you didn't know it. And that just happened to me recently, where I had an object and that I'd totally forgotten about. And I really was desperate. I was blocked. I needed to get a whole group of people from point A to point B. I always have a ticking clock. There was not much time for them to do it. So I realized that the only way to do it was magic, and none of them had magic. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I thought, okay, water magic. And I had a waterway. I write about, in my Two Realms trilogy, I write about medieval Scotland and fairy. So at this point, I'm in medieval Scotland, and I'm thinking, oh, that waterway, that would work. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I've been there, and it's a series of locks. So I'm pretty sure that that was a big engineering thing that was not available in the Middle Ages. So sure enough, it wasn't. So I had to go to plan B and started going back through. And then I realized that there was one object that I had put in there that I didn't know why at the time, but all of a sudden it solved all my problems. So trust that your subconscious sometimes knows more than your conscious. And it directs you to put things in. And that can be very helpful when you're blocked and don't know where to go. I mentioned the ticking clock because that's a device that I use in every single one of my books. And that's when time is running out for your protagonist. It's great for creating tension, for revealing character, because your character is always up against this ticking clock. And it could be something, like world-shattering ticking clock, like your hero or heroine has to find and disarm a bomb that's somewhere in a crowded stadium before it goes off. Well, a good author, of course, would up that stakes by saying, okay, my hero or heroine has to find and disarm the bomb before it goes off in the crowded stadium because my child is in the stadium. You make it personal and you add to the stakes that way. And that creates a lot of tension and a lot of conflict. And you really feel the ticking clock. So find it before it explodes. So it can be something really huge like the stadium, or it can be something like the first, my first book that was ever published, Spell Check, is a sweet teen romance. And in that, the protagonist is she has until Halloween to figure out how to stop her best friend from casting a binding love spell on my protagonist's secret crush. So that may not seem as important as a bomb going off, and potentially killing thousands of people. But trust me, if you're a teenager, that's the same thing. That's their world. That's how important it is. And they only have until Halloween because that's when the moon's going to be in the right phase for casting the spell. So always have a ticking clock. Okay, here's some more homework. So everything we've been talking about of these literary devices have an effect on the overarching plot, right? As well as revealing character. But urgency placement, they all create urgency. So your homework, again, it's easier to do this on television than in a book because it's faster. So your homework would be to look at a 1 hour television program that has commercials. So not on PBS and not on streaming. And look to see if it has these markers that create urgency. And I want you to think about every time there's a commercial, think of it as that's a chapter break. So you can see that, ask yourself, go in, watch one of these shows and have your list and say, okay, is there an opening hook? Which of these devices did they use for that opening hook? And did it hook your attention, right? And then what happens right before the commercial break? Has the writer somehow upped the stakes for the character? Has the story changed direction? Has a secret been revealed? Is the character suddenly in jeopardy? Or is a member of their family or some loved one suddenly in jeopardy? So that should be happening. The opening hook is the very beginning of the show. And then what happens right at the end, right before a commercial? And what do they do? How do they hook you into coming back after the commercials to watch the next part? And does that open with things? Are you in media res? Are you already like in the thick of things? And what has happened? Up the stakes, change direction, secret been revealed, or a character in jeopardy, or something else. And that's a really good way to train yourself on how to write page-turning chapters, is to analyze those 1 hour stories and to think of them as each one of these segments is a chapter. All right, we started late, so I kind of lost track of time. So Mike, maybe you can tell me, do we want to have a couple of examples of intriguing opening sentences and or ending of a chapter, or do we want to go right into Q&A? What would people like to do?
So, Ariella, we've got about 25 minutes, so whatever you want to do at that time.
Okay, awesome. All right, let me make a note, 25. See, I was talking quickly. Oh, I definitely want to leave lots of time for questions because I know I talk fast. But it looks like I have time to give you a couple of examples. Because the literary devices, those are kind of like looking at the macro picture, the big picture of your manuscript and how you can use these devices to reveal character, to keep people turning the page, how to create, conflict and keep people going. So again, with this urgency situation in the book, we create that by chapter hooks, which is an intriguing first line, and by ending every chapter with a cliffhanger. And the most important is always that first chapter, that very first one, because especially if you're trying to get traditionally or be a hybrid author, you need to be able to hook an agent or an editor with your opening line, because that kind of sets the voice and the tone for the rest of your book. And then if you can keep them reading, then you should definitely end on a hook. So just a couple of very different openings and endings. An opening beginning would be Another Roadside Attraction, which was by Tom Robbins back in 1990. And his opening was, "The magician's underwear has just been found in a cardboard suitcase floating in a stagnant pond on the outskirts of Miami. However significant that discovery may be, and there is the possibility that it could alter the destiny of each and every one of us, it's not the incident with which to begin this report." That's a unique author voice, and you really have no idea where Tom Robbins is going. So you might stick with him for the next few paragraphs to see what the heck he's doing. One of my favorite authors, Gail Carriger, who writes kind of steampunk, London. I mean, I'm not someone who loves vampires, but she writes vampires to adore. And she also happens to be in one of my Bay Area writing groups. I'm in Palm Springs now in Southern California, but I stay on Zoom, thankfully, with my Bay Area ladies. And Gail Carriger in the Soulless, as in without a soul. Soulless is the first book in one of her series, one of my favorite series. And this is one of her endings, I think. "The two werewolves exited the Duke's townhouse into the black London night, one bearing the body of a dead vampire, and the other a puzzled expression." You have to read, you have to find out what the heck is going on. And with Gail, she's one of those few authors who is a brilliant author, very, very well-published author, but she's also like brilliant in all the other things. Like she's right brain and left brain. So anytime I read an article by her, I'm like thrilled. And then this one, of course, I have to give you one about witches, right? This is the opening sentence from The Witches, Salem, 1692. That's actually the title of the book. And it's by the Pulitzer Prize winning author Stacy Schiff. It was published in 2015. And the opening is, "In 1692, the Massachusetts Bay Colony executed 14 women, 5 men, and 2 dogs for witchcraft." The book is like this thick. It's huge, but what a great beginning for that. So these are all things to think about and to inspire you. And just remember that on the macro level and on the micro level, you can use these sometimes diabolical and sometimes not devices to create tension and conflict. You can reveal character, and you can thrust your story and your characters into all kinds of new directions and keep that plot moving forward and keep the reader turning the page. We all want to hear, oh, I thought I would just read a little bit, but then I was up to 1 a.m. reading your book, and now I have to go take a test or something. That's how my readers are, because they're, a lot of them are young. But so that's always like my favorite. We want to keep people reading, hopefully not to, destroy their test scores or something. But as you use these devices, you'll find them not only helpful, but hopefully not too diabolical. All right, so sounds like we've got lots of time for questions, and I'll let Mike be the one to cut me off when the time comes to cut people off.
Who has questions for Ariella?
I have you all stupefied.
Any paranormals here that are interested in? Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm a paranoid.
Paranormal.
Say that, obviously. I'm curious about the use of shaman in your work, and I'm curious about the historical similarities and differences of the shaman role across cultures. Take 5 minutes or 2 minutes. I'm glad to listen.
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you for asking. So what I have found that, well, first of all, shamanism is like one of the oldest practicing, religion, non-religions on the planet. And it's interesting because it is across the world. And there's so many similarities, whether you're a shaman in Siberia or in Peru or in Palm Springs. It doesn't seem to matter. There's certain tenets that everybody follows. And my shamanism, and I get called in, let's put it this way. I teach, one of the classes I teach in person is defense against the dark arts. And I have found that in my personal experiences as a shaman, so many of that gets woven into my books. Whether it is about the reasons you should not ever do a binding love spell, because that's holding somebody against their will, and you're not, it's not true love. Or whether it's someone who is having to have a demon removed from them. These are all things that I've already experienced. And so I weave them into my books. Now, most of the shaman things that I have experienced, I weave into the books, go into my Teen Witch Saga. And in that series, it's a contemporary series, and the girls it's a spell book that changes, the entire magic changes with each girl who possesses it. So it gets passed on at the end of each book to somebody else, and then the magic changes. So that allows me to explore all kinds of different forms of magic, and how magic is manifested or utilized in different parts of the United States. And for all of these, I was able to use my own experiences. I have, let's see, I have to go back, where are they? Spell check, well, I've got them right here. Spellfire. In Spellfire, which actually takes place in Palm Springs, that one I use, that's got the most, I think, of my own experiences in it, because part of it takes place in a metaphysical store owned by the aunt and uncle of the protagonist. And it's very much like I used to work for, and then where I trained was from a hereditary shaman from El Salvador. And I've had to take what I learned from her and adapt it to the Americas and the medicine animals we have here, the kind of demons we might have here, and cultural attitudes. So I was able to weave a lot of what I had experienced, particularly at that place where I encountered there two very evil, I'm not sure, they called themselves witches. One was a shaman, very, very evil women. And I have to say, I'd never really came up against such blatant evil before. And it was a very good learning experience. But my very first day on the job there as a receptionist at that metaphysical store, which was also a day spa of all things, my very first the very first client who walked in the door, before she came in, my boss, the hereditary shaman, said, okay, so-and-so is our first appointment. And she's always full of demons. So try not to look at her when she comes in. And I'm just going to take her to the back and kind of ignore whatever you might hear coming out of that room. And right then I'm like, this is not an ordinary receptionist job, right? And all of a sudden, when they're back there, I start hearing my boss, she who of course speaks Spanish as well as English, yelling things that sounded like Latin to me. I took Spanish, German, and French in college. And I'm thinking, this is Latin, that sounds like Latin. And then it's getting louder, and she sounds like she's getting kind of desperate, like things are not going well. And I thought, oh, I think she's got a demon in there that she can't banish. So I crept back to the back of the place, and I saw the door, and I could hear the yelling. And I thought, she's failing, and this, if she doesn't contain this demon, then it's gonna, escape out, or I'm gonna have to deal with it. So I did a symbol on the door and just stopped it, right? Or thought, I hope this, if it doesn't stop the demon, I hope it at least contains the demon. And then soon after that, everything quieted down. The client leaves, my boss comes out, she's just smiling from ear to ear. And I said, oh, that looked like it was kind of rough. And she goes, oh yeah. And then all of a sudden it all changed. And I asked the client, what changed? Why did the demon finally leave? And the woman said, oh, as soon as I saw the pentacle on the door, I knew everything was gonna be fine, and that banished the demon. And my boss said, oh, that wasn't me, that must have been Ariella. And of course it had been. And so that was like my first experience of, I had a lot more power than I realized. And so I wrote that the demon and the evil witch that I had met through all this into Spellfire. So it's weaving in things that I've experienced, whether it's been, for good or for bad, evil or not, and weave it into the books. And the only time I had to, because the spell book changes with each girl, that I had to actually do a lot of research. And that was a book that was Spell for Sophia, which partially takes place in New Orleans. And so I went to the Bayou, I went to reputable voodoo places to try. And then at a writer's conference, at PantheaCon, I was able to actually sit in on a drawing down of a major god, I guess is what they call it, and see what that is like. And so that informed how I wrote Spell for Sophia, because that was something I personally had not experienced, that kind of magic. So, but there is in Spell for Sophia a walk-in. I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but that's when someone decides they're still alive, but they decide that they really don't want to keep living. So they basically yield over their soul to somebody else, their body to somebody else. And so somebody else walks into their body and takes it over. And so that gets into the whole realm of what kind of energy, what kind of vibes do you put out? Because you can only, that your vibe will attract somebody of similar, like if you're an alcoholic and you don't want to be in your body anymore, you're going to attract a spirit out there that's roaming around and looking for the same low energy vibration. And so it'll be an alcoholic that steps in. So in Spell for Sophia, I had experience with a walk-in, actually 2 of them. And so I wrote that into Spell for Sophia.
We have some questions from the folks at home. First, can you stop your screen share so we can see your
Sure.
a giant version of you?
Okay. Let's see if I can pull that. Oh, let's see if I can. All right, I might lose you all. Let's see. Oh,
Right.
no, there we are. Thank
All
you.
right. So Jessica asks, what is one of your favorite examples of an unreliable narrator?
Oh, I would say my favorite example of a possibly unreliable narrator is the narrator in A.J. Finn's The Woman in the Window, because she kept me guessing, that narrator.
All right. Ted asks, when you plot a book, where do you start? With a vivid scene, a form of magic, a setting, character, or do the devices take precedence?
It really depends on the book. The fastest book I ever wrote was Spellstruck, and that was completely channeled. It was great. It was like, wow, this went so fast, and it's like, I love this hero, and this is great. So it really just depends. A lot of things come to me. I used to call my shower when I lived in the Bay Area. I called my shower my download chamber, because I would get all these ideas. Of course, they come either when you're driving or you're in the shower, so you can't like write them down. So sometimes it comes like that. I had just recently, I had like all of a sudden this name came to me. I thought, oh, that sounds kind of like this, and I could do that. So it just depends. Like, and well, the Two Realms trilogy started with I was doing some Scottish clan research, and I read about this one clan, this kidnapping of this young woman, and what happened to her. And that just, as I'm reading, I'm thinking, wow, that's an amazing story. What if? And then all authors always go into that what if realm. And so mine was, what if she ends up trying to escape and ends up in fairy? So yeah, you have to be careful when you call me on the phone, because I'm either, in medieval Scotland, or I'm in fairy, or, I'm in an angel realm or something. So yeah, this is why I don't drink or do drugs, because I'm already so out there. So it just depends. And then once I get whatever the inspiration is, then all these other things come into effect. But I definitely have learned to do a lot more plotting and outlining, because it goes faster and there's less conflict with my editor, because she's very big on, well, where are you going with this? What are you doing? And we have a Chekhov's gun. We have a ongoing disagreement on whether or not I have a Chekhov's gun in the Viking Mist, because she's like, this is a Chekhov's gun. You've got to do something at the end. I'm like, no, I'm not. It's not a Chekhov's gun. So finally, the only way I could get her to like, okay, on the book was to say, okay, on book 3, I will bring it back in. And she'd keep saying, are you sure? I'm like, oh yeah. Like, I had no idea how to bring it back in. Hang on, I'm going to plug in I can just see I'm like running out of battery here. But go ahead, ask me the next question.
All right, next question. Nicole wants to know, how do you choose which literary device to use in your books? Does the story reveal how to twist the plot, or do you decide before it's written?
I almost, well, as I said, I always do a ticking clock, because I love it. And I always, or almost always, do the media res. So, because that's just, though, because my editor is a literary, an award-winning short story literary author in her own right, she, we have different tastes and different ways of doing it. So sometimes when her voice is particularly strong in my head, I will change course on something. But we do a lot of arm wrestling. So usually the literary device comes all the other literary devices might come later, other than the ticking clock is a guarantee on all of mine.
It wants to know more about the walk-ins. If you would share what happened with them.
Oh, like in real life, what happened?
I'm thinking that's what she wants to know. Yeah.
Okay, well, I will give you one example. So one of the things as a shaman, one of the first things when I take on clients is I always say, I need to do a chakra clearing on you. So that's when you're going through these vortexes that run up and down your spine and beyond. And because that's when the psychic hits start coming. So as I'm going into each of the vortexes, I get information about either a medical problem or a something that happened to them in their past. Like, oh, you have all this pain here because in the such and such century, you were stabbed with a spear, and the spear has crystallized as you keep getting reincarnated, things like that. So if your chakras are depending on how you are and how guarded you are, you put off, you have like this astral around you, this vibe. And so with the walk-in, the one I can tell you about, there was a gentleman that I knew who, I won't tell you all of it because it's going to be a great book someday, but I don't want to put it out there because of that. So I won't tell you all the information, but I will tell you, this was a man that I knew who had never had a girlfriend, I don't think. And he finally fell in love with somebody. And then all of a sudden he totally upended his whole life and moved away with her. And of course, for me and my then husband were like, wow, there's a lot of alarm bells going off. And he was having a lot of mental health issues right before that. And the doctors were having a very hard time finding the right, as he called it, cocktail of drugs to calm his mental illness. So he goes off to, I think it was Grass Valley, with this woman, and all of us, and this guy was a contractor, and he has a mental breakdown because she leaves him in a very kind of violent and unfair way. And he had given up everything for her. So he comes back to the Bay Area and tries to resume his contracting thing. So I noticed right away that something was wrong, because here was someone who could really do anything in the contracting world. And all of a sudden he couldn't do anything. It was like he had this mental breakdown. He tried to exit his body, and who came in was really horrible. And one way to find out if you're dealing with a walk-in is if somebody you know, and you know the kind of people they normally hang out with, all of a sudden they're with really creepy people. And all of a sudden they don't know how to do the profession that they have always excelled at. So there was all these warning signs going off in my head when I saw him that something was really, really off. And then I had like a burst, something in a bathroom, and some kind of a flood. So he came out to look at it, the walk-in, and he brought with him these two really scuzzy people that this gentleman usually always worked with top designers. That's how high up he was in the contracting world. And all of a sudden, these really scuzzy people that I've never seen him before, and none of them seemed to know anything about how to fix what had happened. And he tried something where he's botched all this stuff. And then more people came for other things when I tried to sell the house. And something that would have been really easy for him, he brought somebody else in, and that person must have been a very sensitive, because he didn't want to be anywhere near the walk-in. And it was so odd. And I thought, wow, this guy, he's now been taken over by somebody else. And then he committed a truly bizarre crime, and the walk-in. And of course, when that happens and something goes really wrong, then sometimes the original soul will jump back in to try and fix it. But I don't think the original soul ever jumped back in. And so it was a really sad case where you could tell he had totally given up he had a complete mental breakdown and never came back, but his body was still there. And this really horrible energy walked in. So that can only happen if you have like holes in your aura or something, where somebody, because you put off a vibration. And if you're in that kind of a crisis and suicidal, for instance, you're very low vibration. So you attract into you other low vibrations, and they'll often look for someone who has the same addiction as them. He didn't have any addictions that I knew of, but the other walk-in that I know of was an alcoholic, and attracted the walk-in that came and took him over was another alcoholic who knew nothing about this other person's white collar job. And so that person lost everything. In both cases, the walk-in caused leaving their own body caused them to lose everything.
Wow.
Does
All
that
right,
help?
one question. You talked about opening hooks, chapter hooks, and cliffhangers. How do you manage that in a series from book to book?
Oh, well, that's a great question. So in each book, I always try to resolve whatever was the main story point in that book, right? And then, but I always have to leave a hook for the next one. And I just got a Kirkus review for The Viking Mist, which is my most recent book, and that's book 2 in my Two Realms trilogy. And I loved that the Kirkus reviewer said that something to the effect of the unexpected, like an unexpected spectacular ending is going to leave everybody waiting for the forthcoming 3rd book. And that was so great to me because that ending in book 2 was a knockdown, drag out fight between me and my editor. And the fight was because she was so invested in that character that she didn't like what happened to the character in the end. But I felt I had totally set up for why this had to happen at the end. And she's like, oh, this and this and this could happen. I'm like, no, this is what is happening. And a book club read The Viking Mist. And I went to visit a couple of the ladies, after the book club had read the book and they had had their discussion. And so I said, well, what did you think about the book? And one of the women like immediately launched in. It was like she was channeling my editor. She almost had the exact same words as my editor did when she was trying to change the story, trying to change the ending. She's like, you're going to do this, right? You're going to do magic and you're going to do this. And like, I'm not so sure I'm going to do that. So it was like, okay, I did something like totally unexpected, I guess that people, but it was great because people were so invested in the character that they were mad at me. So, I mean, I guess I got their attention. But again, if they believed I had not done any groundwork, then it would have been even worse. But I'm glad that the reviewer loved the ending and said it's going to make everybody want to read book 3. And I can't wait for my editor to resurface. She just moved to Australia for a year, so I can show her that Kirkus review and say, see.
Ariella, thank you very much.
You are so welcome. Thank you for having me here today. I appreciate it. You've been a wonderful group. Thank you.